This is
Okay.
the Impunity Observer podcast. Fergus Hodgson, your host. I'm publisher. Go to impunityobserver.com for all our content. Please subscribe on X, YouTube, and get our monthly e-newsletter. I'm so pleased to be joined today by Rafael Ramirez de Alba. He is a professor of economics at IPADE Business School in Mexico City. I was fortunate to take a class with IPADE when I was doing my MBA, and that's how I became familiar with him. Economics instructor, and we're going to examine the overwhelming result this weekend. So, Rafael, I appreciate your time. And just to give people a little bit of context, it appears now the results are not final, that the center-right coalition has struggled to even get 1/3 of the votes. So
Mm.
that the leftist or socialist, whatever you want to call it, Morena coalition has crushed the opposition. Why has this broad group of more market friendly or more conservative parties struggle to compete? Why have they performed so poorly?
Well, I think there's a couple of things we should take into account. First of all, this was very much a state election. The president of Mexico not only put his thumb on the scales, he put his whole hand. He was very active attacking the
Yeah.
opposition candidate. So it's a lot of interference from the president. A lot of resources were spent. Just to give you an idea, the fiscal deficit for 2024 is expected to be around 6% of GDP. So massive spending by the government, a massive scare campaign telling people they would lose their social benefits if the opposition was elected. There are a lot of reports of threats by drug dealers, by the narcos. This was one of the bloodiest election seasons in the history of Mexico. Over 30 candidates were killed. So very violent, very much control and by the government. So that goes a long way in explaining what happened. Now, the other part of the question, I would actually not exactly agree with how you define it. Even though the PAN party used to
Yes.
be a right-wing party, it hasn't been for a while now. So I don't think there was really a conservative opposition that put forward a coherent and understandable and attractive alternative to the government. So
Mhm.
basically, the candidate just wanted to be. She said, "I'm just like the government. Now I'm gonna keep on giving you all the handouts. No real conservative platform, and but I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna be there's gonna be less corruption, and I'm gonna be more efficient, right? So
Mm.
that didn't resonate with the voters. They say, yeah, I'm getting some money from the government now. Things are going relatively well. The macroeconomic situation is not that bad, all things considered. Why should I change? What's the opposition? There's really no opposition. So I think this is going to be a very interesting defining moment in politics in Mexico. We will see if a real alternative emerges out of the ashes of the old parties. But I don't think, as things stand today, that there's really a conservative opposition in Mexico.
Yeah, so that's one of the challenges of looking at these elections from the outside. We assume some kind of competing parties, but as you say, it can easily be that the two parties are almost competing for the same message, and one is just a watered down version of the other.
Mhm.
And yeah, so because this is one of the challenges, Mexico is not one of the countries I've followed so closely, but of course, Mexico is supremely influential and important for the United States. Now, the not only has Morena won the presidency, it appears, but
Mhm.
also more than 2/3 of the legislature.
Mhm.
So does that this now I'm not a constitutional expert, but does that mean unilaterally this party can change the constitution without any referendum or any kind of movement with the people?
No, it doesn't go that far. What they can do, of course, it's much easier for them to pass different laws that they want to
Mm,
enact. Right now, in order to change the Constitution, they have to go through a process where it has to be approved by a certain number of state congresses. So that would be a very lengthy process, lengthy, complicated process. And I don't think they actually need to do that because, controlling Congress, even without changing the Constitution, there's a lot they can achieve of their agenda.
That's right. They would have to both get the super majority in Congress and of the states. And as happens here in the United States all the time, people just ignore what is written down in the Constitution. So it becomes a power struggle rather than a matter of what is written in law. Now, there is the sense that AMLO, the sitting president or incumbent, is heavily involved with this coalition. Does he have unrealized ambitions that will manifest in the next term?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's, I mean, very few people in Mexico doubt that his intention is to stay in power. Now, he was very careful. He chose a handpicked successor that tried for a while during the campaign to put some distance between her and the president in certain sensitive issues, but she was scolded right away. And after that, she was almost verbatim repeating what the president says. So a lot of people in Mexico now are wondering if she's going to be able to assert some independence from AMLO. But I guess the consensus is that it's going to be very, very hard for her. AMLO is going to be absolutely behind the throne and absolutely trying to influence everything that happens in Mexico. No one is under the impression that he's just going to quietly retire and go away to his ranch as he promised. He's definitely going to be a force to contend with in the future.
Are there specific issues, though, that he is maybe focused on or seeking to reform from behind the scenes?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, some of the key issues in his agenda. Well, first of all, he's trying to concentrate power, and that's one of the big concerns out of this election. We're going to have an executive power very strong. The president has usually been very strong in Mexico. Now his party is going to control Congress, and he's making movements to try to bring the Supreme Court also under his control. So that concentration of power is very worrisome. Now, in terms of policies, this is a president who really is convinced that the government, the state, has to be in charge of energy. That's sort of one of the main things that he's pushing for. During his term, he made it very difficult for the private sector to go into production and distribution of energy, both in the oil and gas company of Mexico, and in the national electricity company. Now, he's gonna deepen that. He's gonna go even further. He doesn't want to see any investment at all in the energy sector. So that's one of the things that he really wants to achieve. And the other big thing that has sort of flown a little bit under the radar is that they want to reform the pension system in Mexico. About 30 years ago, we changed the pension system to have individual retirement accounts. And that has been extremely successful. That has been one of the pillars of macroeconomic stability in Mexico as a source of sizable amounts of domestic savings. Now he's against that system. He wants to revert back to the old system where you basically collect taxes and pay as you go. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's very high on the agenda for the new president following the lead of AMLO.
Yeah, we've written about this is in process in Uruguay right now. A similar reversal is facing referendum in October.
Yep.
But what is the status of Pemex then? Is that fully state-owned or a combination?
No, it's fully state-owned through a reform in the time of President Peña Nieto. There was a reform of the energy sector to allow private companies a little bit to start producing energy, to start exploring and producing oil and gas. There were some auctions, but then those were canceled, and there hasn't been any more auctions after that. So Pemex now has full control in terms of production and transportation of oil and gas in Mexico, and it's fully government owned.
Okay. Now this new coalition, it does seem maybe fragmented, hard to control. especially if you say this new president is not so influential, has less clout. However, there does seem to already be hostility towards the United States, especially in terms of immigration enforcement. This was a fear previously prior to AMLO getting to office, and yet it didn't seem to materialize so much in that he was cooperative with Donald Trump. Will there be conflict, or is this just rhetoric being spoken now, or will there actually be a dispute faced, do you foresee?
I think there will be some dispute, and it's related to three issues. First of all, is trade, right? The USMCA trade agreement has to be jointly reviewed in 2026, so that's about 2 years from now. And there are some issues around that, right? One of the biggest things that's sort of becoming very, very important in the last few months is China trying to circumvent trade restrictions from the US via investment in Mexico. So that's going to be very, very high in the agenda, and it's and I'm pretty sure that whoever is president, even if regardless if it's Biden or Trump, that they're going to be pushing for a restriction of Chinese investment in Mexico to take advantage of the trade agreement between Mexico and the US. So that's going to be a big issue, number one. Second big issue revolves around the drug traffic business, and especially the fentanyl crisis in the US. There's the impression in the US that Mexico is not doing enough. And there's a growing concern here in Mexico that the government of Morena has been behind a lot of the success in terms of the elections here in Mexico. So that's going to be another big issue. And the third one revolves around immigration. As you know, Mexico was AMLO was very, he cooperated with Trump enacting the Stay in Mexico policy, which was reversed after Biden took power. But I'm sure if Trump is reelected, he will go back to the Stay in Mexico policy, and that could be an issue of contention with the new government in Mexico as well.
Well, that's interesting. You know, the China connection, because still opposition to Chinese expansion in Latin America is a bipartisan issue in the United States. So regardless of which party is in power here, they will oppose that.
Absolutely.
Now, is it fair to say that Mexico is a one-party state now, that there's really no competition with the ruling party, a bit like, let's say, the Democratic Party in California?
Yeah, you could say that. I mean, this was the election was very clear. The mandate was very loud and clear. As you just mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, the candidate for president won over 60% of the vote. They got 7 out of gubernatorial races in this process, 7 out of 9, 2/3 of Congress, or almost 2/3 of Congress, depending on whether it's deputies or Senate. So there are some pockets in Mexico where the opposition is still strong, especially in the Bajío region in Mexico. But it was I think, even though some of this was expected, I think it was a surprise just the size of the victory. And we need to go back to Mexico's history for a while. Morena was born out of the old PRI, the PRI party that was in power for 60 years in Mexico. Even though we change presidents every 6 years, but it was always someone from the PRI, right? And that's exactly what they want to reestablish in Mexico. So it's going to be extremely, extremely hard for the opposition to regroup. The next election in 6 years is going to be just as dirty as this one. So I'm afraid it could take several rounds of elections, several years, to really have a strong opposition again in Mexico.
So you led into my next question then. What's happening with the business community? Because I'm not sure whether they just try to stay above the fray and avoid picking sides, just to try to be in good terms with whatever party gets into power. But at some point, it becomes almost impossible or just unavoidable that you have to support an opposition if you feel just in too much danger. Will the organized business community of Mexico seek to fund, back, let's say, just give organizational support to an alternative, or they just be afraid at this point to stand up to the regime?
Well, again, hopefully they will do that. But again, if you look at what happened in the last 6 years, and yeah, in the recent history of Mexico, I think one of the greatest challenges that we have, one of the greatest problems that we have in Mexico is crony capitalism, right?
Sure.
So the business community just want to be, in good terms with whoever is in government. And let me tell you something. The left here in Mexico, at least the left, that's personified by AMLO and to a certain extent by the new president, Claudia Sheinbaum, it's a
Yes.
very pragmatic left, right?
Okay.
So even though they are friends with Petros and Borics and Maduros
Sao
of
Paulo
this world,
Forum. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But they are not as ideological. They they realize they need business. They need the business sector. So they sort of come to an agreement and say, okay, so as long as I'm not going to let you go into energy, there are certain things that only the government has to do. You have to play by my rules, and you have to support me. Don't face me. Don't antagonize me, and I'll let you be. So AMLO is actually friends with a fair number of very relevant business people here in Mexico. So
Mm.
they've achieved sort of a like a cohabitation type of situation where they don't really see the need for a radical change and to really be supporting or to be seen as supporting very strongly an opposition party or an opposition candidate. So I'm afraid that that's just going to continue. They'll just find a way to go on with their businesses, try not to to make the government angry and not really do anything that's conceived to be that's seen to be as very aggressive.
So that they'll be likely be reluctant to be disruptive, although of
Mhm.
course the aspirant lower middle classes who want to build business will be the ones who suffer, not those who, like you said, are the crony capitalists. One thing, one reason why we wouldn't expect a Venezuela scenario, though, is that Mexico does have a more diversified economy and
Mhm.
much deeper trade relations with the United States. So it can take a lot more punishment, you might say, than
Mhm.
other countries in Latin America. So
Yeah.
even if, like you said, even if they have nominal ties to the Sao Paulo Forum and what is it, the Grupo de Puebla,
Mhm.
they're not Fidel Castro type real hardliners.
Exactly. Because that wasn't really, I mean, if you look at the campaign, it wasn't at all about that. I mean, it was mainly about, the government is here for you. We're going to help you out. I'm going to give you all these handouts, all these social programs. We support entrepreneurs. We support entrepreneurship. We're concerned about, peace and safety. They say the right words, right? They are not
Mm.
revolutionaries saying, we're against, the oligarchs, we're against the business, So they present themselves as business friendly, as long
Mm.
as business is friendly with them.
Sure. Okay. We've been speaking with Rafael Ramirez de Alba of the IPADE Business School. And please, if you've not already, subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow him on X. He's active. He's a great account, so I recommend there. Rafael, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Fergus, thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you.